Alrighty, welcome to Nikos, everybody. I'm Jonathan Albin, and I'm the host of Game Master Soapbox, Game Master with 50 years of experience, very near. And today we are going to talk about being prepped, being a prepper. And by preparation in this case, of course, I'm not referring to preventing or preparing for nuclear war or to survive a zombie apocalypse or anything else crazy like that. No, I'm talking about being prepared for a role play game. So hang on just a second. I've got to do one quick thing here. Yes. Oops. That'll freak you out. Get rid of that. Alrighty. Really professional. I'll start over. Welcome to Nycos, everybody. I'm Jonathan Albin. I am Game Master J, and this is Game Master Soapbox. Today we are talking about being prepared. And I'm not talking about preparation for the end of the world. I'm not preparing for global warming, climate change, nuclear war, or the zombie apocalypse. No, today we're talking about preparation to play a role-play game. And many people who already know about role-playing games won't find this necessarily helpful, but I do believe there are some items that are in here that even the veteran player might find they want to include in their preparation for their game sessions. So stick around. There's some really cool stuff coming up. So the first we're going to talk about is a filled out character sheet. Now, in preparation for a role-playing game, you have to have a character sheet. And generally during the session 0 of a campaign or the session 0 of a new games group, the expectation is that you actually will spend that first session actually filling out your character sheet, developing your persona for the game and whatnot. This is important to have. And the reason why I mentioned filled out in this case is that when you come to a session, you want to have everything ready to go and prepared for that particular session, already handled. And by bringing your character sheet already filled out and already advanced, if it's a game that does level advancement and such, you want to definitely have that taken care of before you start, because ultimately the amount of time that we human beings have to play is limited, right? In our world today, a person doesn't get to play games every day. I mean, I'm one of the rare ones on the planet where I do. And I endeavor in my career, in my path, to provide that entertainment to as many people as possible. So I do, if I don't run a game every day, I am developing a game property in some fashion, or producing videos like this. But the filled out character sheet is absolutely important. You need to know everything that's required on that sheet. And every game system is different, and some of them have a quarter page small data block, and that's all they need. And then others, they take a 3 or 4 page portfolio to be fully filled out. So you definitely want to have a filled out character sheet when you begin, because if you're already prepped in that fashion, when it's time to start making decisions, you can look down, know which numbers you need to roll, and move forward through the game in that fashion. If a character sheet, on the other hand, is not officially leveled up, or it doesn't got the advancements that were done in the previous week, you haven't completed a portion of the background, then there's going to be hiccups and stops in the progression of the events of the game, and that tends to slow it down and to negatively affect the dynamics of play. The next thing we want to look at making sure that we have in addition to that is a notebook, some form of paper, or in the modern era, maybe. I know I'm an old fart here when I'm talking about notebooks and paper. Most of you have already gone to, no, I use my phone and I just hit the buttons here and I keep notes that fashion. Some people use a laptop or a tablet so they can operate and gather that information quickly. The main reason why you want something to write on or scribble with is that occasionally in game you have to make equations. You have to do calculations for modifying what a number is or whatever. So having a notebook or paper or something like that is important. Generally, also, there are data dumps. There's lore that comes out in the game session that's important for your players to know. And if you don't have a way to write it down or track it, you tend to forget it and it drops out, and then you don't have it. And it reduces your enjoyment of the game because you can't, for the life of you, remember that character's name that you ran into last week that's important to the story this week. So, some form of something to write on. Next, of course, is a pencil, an eraser, because if you're going to write on something, you definitely want a pencil and eraser, or a stylus if you're using the other methods, a laptop or tablet. Notice I don't say pen or magic marker, and the reason is that generally speaking, a character sheet is a fluid document. It changes all the time, and so writing with a pen is problematic because then you've got to decide which part was actually scratched out from last week and which part's new, and it's just far easier if you use a pencil and paper. There's a famous old Cold War joke about the U.S. military in the beginning stages of the space race. We spent, I don't know, it was a very large number of dollars developing a pen that would write in a zero-G environment. And it was really funny because the Russians, of course, they solved the problem for far less money because they just took pencils. So it's important to have something to write with, because if you got a paper, you're going to want to write on it. So, the next thing you're going to want to include is going to be graph paper or hex paper. Now, this is not nearly as important in the modern era because storytellers generally have physically visual maps that can be used week over week, or their story is not based on the locale that they are in and it's more verbal. But graph paper or hex paper helps to keep positioning data, where you are compared to where you're wanting to go and that kind of thing. Hex paper is particularly useful if you're doing outside mapping, only because it's more natural. The lines aren't horizontal and vertical only, so that you can do a diagonal line a little bit easier. And it feels more natural to operate at that smaller angular direction and such. It looks more natural. This graph paper not only works in favor of tracking where you are in space right now, but it also means that you can replicate something more clearly. So if you're dealing with a glyph or whatever, you can draw it out and draw it exactly to scale to make sure it matches up with another piece, so that you can do that for navigating the storyline later as well. You also want to look at, in modern era, this has been really useful for the games that I run, and that is some form of recording device or a cell phone. Utilizing a device that can track the audio information does tend to resolve conflicts. If a person says, well, I didn't say that, or I did think of that and I said it earlier, or whatever, you can use these recording devices to check that out. Plus, if you're doing what I do and you're putting video out there about events and conversations and even full roleplay sessions, a recording device or cell phone allows you to do that. And the cell phone is also particularly useful in those moments when somebody refers to a rule that you can't find in a rule book. It's far quicker to just do a quick search through the internet on our cell phones. And quite frankly, another thing that I've another one of those back in my day moments, as I can remember, in 7th grade, we were finally moving into higher forms of math, and we needed to be able to do equations that included functions. And our teacher was pretty adamant about utilizing calculators in class. And one of the things that was constantly being said is, there'll never be a reason for you to carry a calculator around in the real world. No one's going to have to do these kind of equations in the field, other than, so you want to make sure you know how to do the long form if you have to. So that's what we were learning to do. And it's so funny because now all those things are automatically understood because every person pretty much in the country seems to have access to a calculator or computer at any given moment. As a matter of fact, the argument is that one of these carries as much information as a supercomputer back in my day when I didn't have any TIFAs yet. So so you definitely want some kind of recording device to capture the details of a game session so that there's no confusion and you can more quickly recall information. Next, game master storytellers tend to provide resources in game that you'll want to hold on to. So be prepared week over week to bring with you any of that kind of material that was provided earlier, especially if it was only provided a week or two ago, because more than likely it will come up again in the next couple of sessions because it's top of mind for the storyteller, game master, and it's also up to top of mind with you. So make sure you bring any notes or handouts from the game master. By the way, I've been going back and forth with the terminology. From now on, I'm just going to use game master to cover all of them. I'm not going to break down into whether it's a storyteller or a dungeon master or whatever. So the game master refers to the person who's directing the action. That was an executive decision made exactly 34 seconds ago. So going forward, you need to have those notes and details that were provided because the game master gave them to you for a reason and it plays into what he has in store for you. The next one is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but the reality is that we want to definitely bring our sense of humor to the table. A big challenge we have in our world today is that we often ascribe to someone else an intent that they may or may not have had when they've made statements. And so understanding and accepting that you should offer others the benefit of the doubt is really a factor of your sense of humor. Because if you assume that everyone is saying stuff on purpose to make you feel pain, then that puts you in a place where you're constantly leveraged against having a good time. Whereas if you go, okay, people make mistakes all the time. He didn't mean to say it. It probably was a slip of the tongue. Whatever. The sense of humor aspect really helps with that because we don't want to put a burden on the game that isn't meant to be there. And one of the ways we do that is we carry burdens into the game with us. And the way to avoid that is remember to check those issues at the door, but bring your sense of humor with you. And then finally, and this one seems patently obvious, but I'm going to be doing an example of it here in a second, and that is make sure you bring your snacks. And I'm stated as BYOB, and I know that there are people in the audience that are going, oh, shock and surprise, but it's bring your own beverages, folks. Calm down. It's just bring your own drinks. There are challenges with carrying around big bottles of soda and things like that, and it can be problematic if it spills on a table. So if you bring your own, at least the area of damage that can be impacted is much smaller. So these are the things that are absolutely critical to being prepared for a game. And if you follow this full spectrum, notice the colors, hence my phrase about it being a full spectrum of preparations, you want to have this stuff ready for your game session, and being prepared is 9/10% of your fun is making sure you've got everything that you need within reach. So I want to thank you for listening to this part, because now that I've kind of stopped that part, I do want to switch over. So give me a second here too. Alrighty. How would I describe having a stat of 30? In Nikos, that would be a normal thing. And when I say that, when you refer to a stat of 30, if you're referring to a roleplay game such as Dungeons and Dragons that has a nominal value between 3 and 18 per number, and generally speaking, something between a 9 and 18, then a 30 does seem rather extreme, especially since the scalars on such things change radically. So, for example, a you try to do the math. It always blows my mind. It's 2 points. It's a +1 for each pair of points above 10. So a 30 would be a +15. Is that right? There would be no reason for it. How would I describe having a stat of 30? I would describe that as deity level. You're beyond the parameters of the game mechanism, and you're now at a point where the number no longer holds a meaning. The term kind of blurs the mind because you're having an individual attribute at that level. Now, I say that, and here's what it comes down to for preparation of a character. As most people know, when you create your character, you roll dice to determine your numbers, or you use a standard array, which means the numbers are already given to you and just move them around to pick out which ones you want where. Or you can use a points buy system where you have so many points above a certain value costs more. So with any of those systems, for me, it comes down to this. When you're talking about any role play game that has that standard 3 to say 20 values, I say it this way. If you have a character with 118, God bless you. That's a good thing. You have two numbers that are two values that are 18 or higher, then God knows your character's name. If you have 3 numbers that are 18 or higher, the gods know where you live. If you have 4 numbers 18 or higher, God is going to challenge you. If you have 5 numbers that are 18 or higher, God is going to test you to the ultimate. And if you have 6, just hand me the character sheet because you didn't want to play anyway. Because ultimately the game is about advancement, right? That's what we're all really playing our characters for, is to move up. So, Sephiroth, I hope that answered your question. If you have a stat of 30, an individual stat in NycosRPG, you're going to have all of the numbers you're going to have for skills are going to be somewhere between, say, 5% and 95%. And depending on where you are in the progression of a story, the numbers can start as low as that 5 to 15 value. And at the topmost point, at the beginning of a character, generally you're going to have somewhere between 35 and 45% on the highest. But you could be all the way up to 65 or so. I've actually observed that being rolled. So, did that answer your question, Sephiroth? I hope it did. So, my concept is to stay on air for the duration of my traditional period, which is to be at least an hour and perhaps more than that, in order to engage with anybody who hops on and wants to talk. I don't know where on this screen I can see. There it is. So if you are on air and want to communicate with me, you can do that through the chat box. I'm also on Discord. So if you are a Patreon member with our if you are a supporter of my program through the patreon.com/Nykos site, then you would have access to our Discord channel, in which case I would be glad to actually have a verbal conversation with you as well if you wanted to hop on. I'm currently in the streaming showroom of the NycosRPG Discord. So you heard that cracking sound. I remember I said about BYOB. I have my caffeinated beverage in the lovely mug that was created for me by a friend on the 3D printer, and they painstakingly painted it for me. And I try to remind everybody about it. If you are interested, I think I can coordinate to get others built for you as well. Contact me through any of the means. Put a note in chat or whatever. So Alrighty. What have we got here? Can't quite read it in this font. I will have to change to look at a different screen. Un momento, por favor. Game Master Vault. Nice to see you as well. Howdy, howdy, howdy. I'm doing a bit of typing here just to be included in the chat myself. There we go. So, what can I do? What would you like to talk about today, Sephiroth or Game Master's Vault? If there's anything you'd like to talk about in particular, I'm open to that. Or we can continue to discuss the preparations. Are there any preparations that you do in your games that aren't on my list here? I'd love to hear from you about that. And just a quick refresher for those that have joined the channel since I started the broadcast. Preparation for a role-play game is what we're talking about. We have a lot of people in the world that are doing videos on prepping. As a matter of fact, I did a video the other day about preparing for a science fiction role-play game that I was going to. And if you get a chance to see it, it's kind of clever. I've got a pocketed vest, and I was putting everything in its proper place so that I had my effectively my EDC or everyday carry for what I take for preparation to a role-play game. So I had my dice in a pocket and my pens in a pocket and my notebook in a pocket. Things like that. There you go. Good luck with the session 0 for the new player group. Yay. Awesome. Awesome. So, when you say that you're doing prep work for your RPG session, where are you in development in terms of story? Are you just refreshing yourself, or do you have a full development, drawing the maps out and everything that you have to do before your sessions? See, in my case, I drew the map that I'm operating off of now was initially drawn in 1978, 77, 78, and I've since then made a few modifications to it, iteration after iteration, to make sure that I had all the pieces that made sense for that current story arc. But generally speaking, I made it so that my setup was easy. And when you run a campaign arc as many times as I have, you pretty much have an idea of what they are doing. Pathfinder, yay! One of our veteran players, as a matter of fact, you may have seen the interview with her. Jean Acker plays with us on a regular basis, and I always refer to her as my younger sister. In all candor, she's got almost a decade on me, but she's 78, and she's always been since Pathfinder came out, she stayed with Pathfinder when Dungeons and Dragons did its divergent pathway from roleplay systems. And so she went with Pathfinder. When she first heard me role-playing at the game store where her Pathfinder group met, it was really funny because I would watch that group set up and get all into their engrossed details. But the whole time she was playing, Jean was like this, over her shoulder, trying to listen in to what we were doing. Because after one of the sessions, she came over, she says, "We have all this detail, but we don't have any fun. Your group seems to be having a lot of fun. What is different? What makes the difference?" And I said, "Welcome to Nykos. That's what makes the difference." There you go. See, there you go. You've done something I haven't done until this iteration. I've never been able to do that. I have the campaign arc that I originally designed in 1973, 74, 75, all the way up till it was finished in about 78. That first arc, that first story, is 6.5 years. And since then, I've honed it down to about 6 years per iteration until the 7th iteration. So that means I've played through it at that point 7 times 6, 42 years of play. And in each of those iterations, things had just recycled. So therefore, the story development that I'd done the first time, I could then replicate and reuse. But the idea of bringing players that finished one story and started them into this to your next campaign, that's amazing. That's really good for you, and that's half the players. That's pretty impressive. Now, in my defense, or to just state the obvious, I moved an average of once every 6 months. I went to 22 different grade schools, 6 different high schools across 11 different states. And so, by necessity, my games groups changed constantly. And the fun part is that, therefore, there were very few players that would see the arc through its fruition because they simply, didn't live in the same town with me. Nice. Nice. They're only 20 years apart there, GMV. Do you mind if I shorten it to GMV? I do that with myself sometimes.
Hello.
Hello? I hear a voice.
Catlin.
Ah, there's Jean. Spoke. I invoked her name and she appeared. So we have with us Jean Sephiroth, who's been with us several times. They're back with us, and we also have Game Master's Vault, who joins us. I think he may have changed his name because it didn't show him as a first-time texter, so he's probably been with us before. But new heroes, new story, yay! So yeah, GMV. The longer names tend to be a problem. I mean, I was. For decades in the games business. I worked for the Game Manufacturers Association, and I worked for Konami Digital Entertainment for the Yu-Gi-Oh division. So I worked with the trading card game. So in both those cases, I was operating under a long name like Game Master's Vault. I was Game Market Guru, and made for a long email address, but it conveyed exactly who I was on the initial mention. So. GMG is what I kind of shorted in my name too, and so I appreciate you letting me shorten Game Master Vault to GMV. So yes, and your short window there is the part that fascinates me. That your campaign takes place on the same world, but is continuing the same timeline. How many years did the 5.5 year game last in game time? Many of my games, for example, last hundreds of years. So it spans generation to generation to generation. As a matter of fact, in the case of the most current iteration on Nycos, the 8th iteration, we spanned almost 300 years, and I have players who have played several characters, including you, right, Gene? You had what, 3 different characters across the span of this iteration? 7? Well, yeah, but you were running several that were specifically concurrent because you were running in all of the games I was running during COVID. So.
Yeah, they were all different times. Miri was the first.
Yep.
And Balara.
Yep.
Then Moonstalker.
Yep.
And and Catlin came in there. And Marianne Brandywine. Yeah, they were all.
Gene, your phone's echoing apparently, so maybe this is. Make sure that you.
I'm actually on the computer.
I know, but if you have your microphone on both places, you'll echo.
So no, check. I don't. I only have them on.
So are you? If you're talking to me on Discord, and your screen is open to the same page to see the image, make sure that the microphone on the YouTube screen is muted.
Okay, I didn't bring up YouTube.
Oh, okay.
I
not YouTube. Not YouTube. I said that wrong. Not YouTube. Twitch.
Yeah, I know. I'm not on Twitch either. I was on Twitch, but I couldn't stop the one for the other. Went straight to
Got you.
our
Got you. I'm just clarifying that for the quality of the video, we probably have to limit the amount that we talk. All right.
All right.
So, but you're more than welcome to ask a question or whatever. So the game time for the campaign only lasts 2 years. I find that fascinating. Um, how many levels did the players advance GMV in that campaign? Nice. Oh, so they made it to 13th level. Alrighty, so 13th levels. Jean will. This is one I know she'll definitely feel the same way about. She had a character that Miri that she spoke of earlier was one of her first characters in the campaign, and she played it all the way up to Paragon level, or very close to Paragon level, um, and then we put that character into a new cycle because she was attempting to pursue deity hood in the world of Nikos, which doesn't have any. So that was a fun direction of a story to go in. But the point was is that when she finished her first arc at 16th level, what age were you? How old was your character?
18, barely.
Right, but that was because the tracking of time week over week was done on an instantaneous basis, and we weren't taking into account travel times and such that we should have been. So we don't know exactly how old she was. My point is that the amount of time that goes on between sessions can be instantaneous, or it could be months, or even a year, depending on the campaign. But in the case of player experience is I played a character this week, we did stuff this week, and therefore I've only aged a week. So oh, this time you've done 30 sessions and I just reached 5th level. Now you're talking. Gene will tell you I don't. Back in those days I didn't just slather experience points on people, did I, Gene?
Oh,
You'd be lucky to level up every third or fourth session.
every time was every level was a lot going on to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I did finish right at 20th. I was an 18th level cleric and
That's right. That's why I always thought of
second
you as
level
finishing
paladin.
early. That's why I always thought of you finishing early because you were only 18th as a primary, but you had another class, so that's the reason.
Yeah, I had
So
the two paladin classes
that's fair. That's fair.
during my stressful time.
Yep. So anyway, I see I've got some fuzz on my screen, so let me go fix that real quick. You know what causes that? Causes that is this. Oops, wrong one. When I use the coloring mechanism that I'm using, it leaves the white one on behind it, so all the white off, so writing doesn't. For people that are trying to see now, I want it to be as clean and crisp as ever. Alrighty. So what we were talking about, Gene, just because I know you jumped in a little bit after we started, is what preparation looks like, preparing for a game session. And so you can check me on this list and let me know if there's anything that I'm missing. You need to have your character sheet filled out, which means if you made an advancement last week, the advancement should be showing on the character sheet. This is much more important in a roleplay game like Dungeons and Dragons, where the character sheet only advances in a stepped fashion. But I can't tell you how many times we get to the table and we've got one player that goes, "Oh, I didn't do the level from last week. Let me do that," and then we have to spend 15-20 minutes of quality game time futzing around getting that advancement concluded. So make sure that you do those kind of things between sessions so that you're prepped to play. Second thing is a notebook, paper, or if not that, at least a laptop or a tablet or your phone to keep notes on. It's essential in most roleplay games to keep some track of notes because as a character, you can't remember everything. As a player, you can't remember everything. But as a player character, the player can take notes so the character can remember, if that makes sense. Of course, if you're going to have something to write on, you definitely need to have something to write with. And of course, the recommendation is for a pencil and a good useful eraser. Or if you're using the computers, perhaps you'd have a like a laptop. You might want a stylus. In addition to your regular paper, you want to have some form of graph paper, hex paper, or other graduated paper so that you can track distances from point A to point B and the like. You also will want some, this is not necessarily a mandatory, but it's becoming closer to being mandatory every week, and that is to have some form of recording device or a cell phone so that if there's something in particular you want to capture, whether it be where the models are at the end of a game, that's come in extremely handy in my case because I'll do miniatures layouts, and then being able to go back and refer to the photos from the game is really handy. So having some form of recording device or cell phone is really useful. Then anything that the game master has provided, any notes or handouts or props, especially if they were used last week, make sure you bring them with you and hold on to them as well. There have been situations where I've actually provided items to the players that were not supposed to be taken out of the room. They're supposed to come back to me before the night was over, and they get tucked into game bags and such. And in one case, I didn't get a particular item back for almost 7 months. So make sure that you bring back whatever you are using as far as handouts or props. And then, most importantly, bring your sense of humor and your snacks. And at Gene, I put BYOB. And of course, that means bring your own. That means bring your own beverage. Of course, doesn't have anything to do with, I don't know, beer
or booze.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. Usually it's bring your own Mountain Dew.
Exactly. Even if it's a different flavor, like Code Red or Blast or whatever, right?
Yeah, just most of them they have a diet form. That's the killer. I need that diet stuff.
So you use Hero Lab for the character sheets. Each player has their own binder. Oh wow, they have to show. All right, you got everything they need. All righty. Now that's something else. You mentioned GMV that you provide them with or you keep the character sheets in a binder for the session, so therefore they don't have to take the character home with them. That's okay, but what I have found in that case is that they forget their own advancement, or they forget what the numbers mean, or they don't necessarily even have the notes. And I have found that, at least in my case, it's handy for them to have that material personally.
I found it useful because I use the notes to go home and change it on a computer program.
Oh, nice. Well, it sounds like GMV is all set up. He's got a 47-inch TV behind him, and he links his laptop to it and throws up the pictures of the NPCs they're talking to, so they know specifically who that is. That's pretty clever. My players have to defend on the funny voices or notes. Now, I will mention something that I didn't list here, Gene. Can you think of? I just thought of something that I didn't list on this list of essential prep items that I make my players bring. What is on this list? What was not on that list that I require or I suggest players bring with them? And I'll give you a BP, Gene, to put on.
You need the book so in case you go up, you can, or if somebody he tells you you get an item that you can go into the book reference book, appropriate reference books, and get whatever it is.
No, Gene.
No,
you know I don't play that way. I don't even like giving you an item that's from the book. Because I don't want you going in the books to look stuff up. I mean, I understand you need to know the rules. You need to have them to cross-reference rules, perhaps. But that's not what I require my players to have. What do I require my players to have each week, or recommend that they have? Oh, he says GMV says he's got CDO. You know what CDO is, Gene, right?
No.
That's OCD, but it's alphabetized like it's supposed to be. That's very funny. Very funny.
Bring their attention
No,
on
well,
the
yeah,
game.
now that's true. That's true. But that was actually in last week's video when I talked about what you do while you're at the game. No, Gene, I'm kind of sad that you don't get the BP for this one. Your name tag.
Gotcha.
I created this concept at the beginning of the 7th iteration, and it has worked really well ever since then. And that is, I have each player form a table tent out of a 3x5 card, and then put their character's name on it in bold lettering, along with other information, whether it be their class or whatever. Now that we're running NycosRPG, thankfully we don't have to worry about class any longer. But they put they usually put their name, and sometimes they put their species, so the players can identify each other by that. And I reward that. Pardon me. I reward that. Man, can't get the sentence out. I reward that by granting the players 1 inspiration per week, which means if they need to make a reroll in game, they can flip their name tag down. And when they flip their name tag down, then they get to reroll once per game. And so it's my way of reinforcing bringing their name tags. And so I think it's funny that I said this was going to be a fully prepared list, and I missed one.
That's specific to your game.
Yeah.
But I think it's very good to have that everybody. If that's one time you have a horrible roll, you really need to make it work so that the game is totally fouled up.
I know where the echo's coming from, Gene. Give me a second. I just thought of it. It's all me. It's not you at all. I'll bet it went away right now. Go ahead and say something, Gene, and we'll ask GMV to verify.
How are you?
Did that get rid of the echo, GMV? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it did.
It did.
Oh, you're not hearing the echo anymore either. Okay, yep. You know why? Because I'm using a table microphone. And my table microphone is sitting right next to my speaker. So everything that I'm hearing, you have to hear twice. So there, I fixed it.
Yay!
Yay! See, resourcefulness. That's something else you need to bring to the table. Resourcefulness.
Yeah. And your head on the game. Really, because there's so much going on. If you don't know what your fellows are doing, you're missing half of what's really happening.
Yeah. Well, so I apologize, GMV and Sephiroth, for having the sound mess up because I wasn't wearing my headphones. I've been really good about it until today, and I just got lazy. So it had just dawned on me as I looked up and saw you texting, adding another message, GMV. So yay! I'm glad we fixed it. So in the future that won't happen because we'll all know, so that when somebody comes on and we hear an echo, we'll go, John, where's your earpieces? Yeah, here we go. Phew. Yeah, players will get their character name relatively quickly. I get that, but I like to have the name tags for 2 reasons. Number 1 is I want accountability for that reroll, so it's not just I want to reroll that number, so I'm going to use my name tag, and then they reroll again and again because I'm not paying attention. And it's also a big deal from the other players to look around and see who still has a BP left. So who still has an inspiration left to try this thing we want to try. So, oh, there you go. GMV says he uses a golden coin that he provides when he grants inspiration. So, well, I also use a blessing point system. We haven't talked about that other than what I mentioned. Oh, yeah, see, you use golden coins. That's my BPs are the way you handle a golden coin, and that is they are granted a blessing point for good role play, problem solving, sometimes for physical things that they have that nobody else had that they needed to have, and also
for good puns.
Particular, I was just going to. You stole my thunder, Gene. Particularly good word plays, puns, or quotes from notable movies. Notable meaning one that I've seen. So players that want to quote from anime or manga, forget about it. I'm not going to get it, and it's not going to work.
Think of the good old time movies.
Oh, they can only have one at a time. Wow. He only provides them one golden coin at a time ever, and but they can't give them to other people for free. In Nycos
Mary has.
in Nycos RPG, you can save them up and get a bunch of them and do something really magnificent, or you can give them to other people, but it costs 3 points to one to trade off like that. So.
So you can help somebody out in a dire
Oh,
situation.
okay. So GMV mentions that he can't do puns because half his group is mixed age. Would you say our group is of a mixed age, Gene?
We go from 16 to 77.
Probably younger than 16.
Oh,
Dennis used
we.
to play. Remember?
Oh
Den-
yes, she. What is she? 14?
oh, okay. So Natalia's 14, but I was thinking of Dennis, the 11-year-old.
Oh yes, but he didn't last long.
He didn't last long. No, he actually ruined
It
it for his
makes
brother.
mental. Just there because his brother was there.
Yes. So, and
So
as far as the puns are concerned and whether or not they work on half the party or better, how else are we great punsters to help the youth if we don't provide the puns in their presence? So, bring on the puns. The kids will get it eventually. And that's
they
all I got to
do.
say about that because I am somewhat of a Gene would say that I provide too much punishment in my games. So.
Punishment.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So
And it's all in
so
good
name
fun.
so the name tag, the table tent is the one that I forgot to mention. But you're right, Gene. That's something that I would recommend for all tables, only for the reason of tracking that. And then I've done the reverse too. I've made it so the players wrote their own actual name on the reverse side. And when we are out of game, like at the end of a session, if we're going to do a debrief, I'll have them turn their name tags around so we can all get to know who the people are too. Because quite often when you play with a group, you forget who else is at the table or forget what their
Or
names
we
are.
only know their
So
character name and not their real name.
yeah, so like for example, Forgoth. Gene, do you know what Forgoth's actual name is?
I think I do now. It's Ben.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, but I just learned it about a couple weeks ago, and we've been playing a year and a half.
Oh, yes. Hang on a minute. The channel's running ads right now. Uh, when you're watching, unless you are a uh, unless you're subscribed to the channel, then you watch ads. So if you purchase subscription, if you subscribe to the channel on Discord, on Twitch, there's a fee for that, but it buys you away from the commercials. If not, then every hour or so they run a couple of 30-second commercials on Twitch. It's
Whether you like it or not.
Yeah, well, the reason why they do that is so that they can actually pay me for my services. Okay, the commercials are over. Yay. Fortunately, the commercials only cut you out for a few seconds. And as I was just saying, if you subscribe to the channel, I believe you don't have to watch the commercials any longer. So, a
3 months?
subscription, I think, buys you clear of them.
Is that $4 a month?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And subscription is also one of the triggers for Twitch as far as which. Oh, that's fair, GMV. Don't feel like you have to. I wasn't suggesting that you had to, but that's true. You got to have money for that, and if you're a game master, and you probably are broke anyway. Uh, but you have a lot of cultural clout. One of the things that I realized, I think, 3 years ago was it, Gene, when I decided that I was going to be uh, charging for events that I run in. Like for example, Gene, bless your heart, you should tell this story now that you don't have an echo. Why don't you tell them how far you have to drive to come up and play it at the game in Redlands I run?
One way, 57 miles. across the Santa Ana, well, the Riverside Freeway parking lot.
Yes. So she jumps on the freeway at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to get to my game by 6 p.m. So that tells you something, and that's dedicated. She's driving all the way from Anaheim. She literally lives blocks away from Disneyland, and she drives all the way out to San Bernardino, Redlands to come and play out here. So she is a trooper and a hero and an example. And she's also one of the very first official citizens of Nycos. She actually owns property on Nycos and
It's
establishes.
growing. It's
Yes,
gonna grow by another hex.
you're gonna get another one, huh? Yeah,
Yeah, well, Elwindale's growing up.
it is. It is. Now that we're in the next iteration, it actually that open water open water
Yep,
bay is going to have a port. So
yep, that's it. A fully built up port. I'm gonna buy a little bit more of the coast and gradually work it all the way back so it's too wide, so it's 100 miles wide for about 700
well,
miles.
GMV's got a player. He says it drives an hour and a half before
Wow.
before they moved closer.
Now,
So
it's only 57 miles,
right
but it's 57 miles at prime
at 30
traffic time
at
on
35
one
mile
of
an hour. Yeah, exactly. He says that yeah. So your friend that drives an hour and a half GMV may be actually driving more miles. So we we nod to that accomplishment. Well done, sir. Or I assume, sir. Amen, sir.
And then we had one that had to drive almost an hour, but it was down mountain roads.
Yes.
He
Yeah.
came down some really narrow, dark mountain roads, even wintertime.
Right. Matter of fact, we still have one that does that. Victor lives in Crestline.
Yep.
He comes down from the mountain and he brings his daughter, uh, with the possible exception of when there is snow on the pass, because he's not going to doesn't want to put chains on. So, yay. Okay, I got it right. Got the pronoun proper. It's one of those things when you say a pronoun, you go, oh, in today's world, am I going to get punched in the face, or are they going to say thank you? So, so thank you. GMV has verified that it's a his. Oh, what fun we have in this world today. Yeah, I think we could do a whole episode, Gene, of just call it BMID, BMIMD. No, BMID. Back in my day. BIMD. There we go. Back in my day, and then we could just do challenges like, back in my day, the dice didn't have number, like the D20 was numbered from 1 to 10 twice. You had to color code them to know which one was the high side.
No, and the
Oh,
D30 had minuses, regulars, and pluses. Only went from 1 to 10, but the regular ones were the minuses, so that was a regular 1 through 10. The ones that looked like the regular 1 through 10s were now the 21 through 30. I mean the 11
right.
through
Yeah, but you
20.
you had a 30-sided dice luxury. When I started playing D&D, I had the dice from a Yahtzee set, and I had to create all the charts based
I
on
remember the
3d6s.
wooden dice in the first D&D set.
Yeah, but you had the money to buy the original set. I had to run off of what I could remember playing with Dave Arneson. So, Gene, when did you start playing? What year? GMV wants to know.
75. But,
75.
but but he beat me because he played it before D&D was a game.
Yes,
Now I did play the chainmail paper version, but the guy was telling me, "Well, I just got the set of D&D, and as soon as I get it sent to me, we're gonna play this."
yeah, GMV was 2 years old. That sounds about right. That's what I hear all the time. Is actually, it was really funny. During the first and second iteration, I heard people say, "You played longer than I've been in school," and then later on, it was, "Oh, welcome to your fifth decade." GMV just turned 50. I'm turning 60, and Gene, you are the generous young age of I don't, you don't mind me
77.
asking.
No, I don't. 77.
77. So we're
Seven.
all the old folks. So the trick is that we are also the beginning of the next generation because my group on Monday is pretty amazing. We've got uh, now 3 young folk playing. We've got a 14, a 16, and a 17. I think now. Val
Yeah.
just turned 17, and that's that's a big change for those youngsters. And fortunately, so far we only have one real mutant, and
Yeah.
arguably Natalia might go mutant if we're not careful. She's been hanging around with Forgoth too much. So
Well, she is a fire mage, and
right, right. Well, I did
these are.
I did a presentation yesterday on the kind of people you'll meet at a role play game, and I talked about mutants. So now I can use the term because it's described specifically. It's a player who is playing without regard to the campaign itself. He's either playing for his own self interest or he's playing to see what he can get away with.
Yeah, but not in context of the story, just to do it because he wants to do it.
Yeah, or yeah, just wants to do it, or because he wants to know how the world works. You know, sometimes you push the end numbers. So, and we both started with Dungeons and Dragons, although I branched out pretty quickly into the other games, including Paranoia and
And now,
Mercenaries.
Nikos is the only way.
Exactly. Well, they're all Nikos. That's the truth.
Yeah.
One player that always wants to play something weird. There you go. Want to play different races. So at the beginning of the 7th iteration, the first time I played with kids from the generation leveling now called Generation Z, and one of them was on the autistic spectrum, and he wanted to specifically play something he'd seen in an anime, which was he wanted to play a fox person. And so at that point, I created the concept of the second Genesis. And in that process, I generated 26 different species,
Yep.
25 different species. And so now you can play up to 35 different ones within the Nikos realm. Yes,
Based on
playing different species or playing something weird is pretty common. Unfortunately, you know, when we think back, when I think back to it, playing role play games was the edge. You know, the people that played role play games were the weird ones. You know, the
it's
culture and
like humans
society.
and orcs and elves and gnomes and dwarves and oh my god, how
How,
crazy,
how weird.
how
Wrong with you?
weird.
And now Dungeons and Dragons is doing away with the half races. Half elf and half orc are gone. Can't play them anymore because that's racist.
But that's not true because they exist because they happen and they're cross fertile with humans. Humans are seem to be the unifying element of half-breds.
Yeah, but that argument would be that we're just fecund. We just like to make babies. So or we're just absolutely fertile, fertile, fertile. Oh, he's telling us. GMV's talking about in one of his campaigns a bovine, a Tarmakian in Nikos. They're called Tarmakians. In other words, they'd be Minotaur, and that she was transformed into a fey creature by an amulet. You want to tell him the story about how you got transformed, Valara?
Oh, okay. I was a human. I was a human from Earth, from Terra, and we were called the others when we came to Nikos in a huge colony ship. And we had been given the title to Nikos by the ruler of Nikos as a free and pristine virgin planet with nobody on it. We get there and we find out that there are lots of people on there.
Yeah,
And
not only secondary quote primitive species you could dominate, but they're actually human beings.
human beings, and then strange elves that flew around in flying living force. And well, anyway, so in the inimicable style of Earth, we of course had to conquer them,
Hmm.
and so we came down. But then there was a change in time because the very vessel that we were on got exploded by a group that what kind of was out of time with everything, and they exploded the ship. So that whole happening disappeared. Eventually, my girl landed because there were whales in the sky, and it hit her ship coming down with a scientific crew, and she gets stranded in
I
the
was
Arctic.
Gene. You're doing it again. I only asked about the transformation.
Okay.
What happened to Valara when she was a mortal? But what happened to her?
We were in this elven city, and I sat down in the chair, and the chair gave my friend a number, and she was down there, and she brought me up this thing, and I held on to it, and I died. Well, luckily she brought me back, though. She was kind of waiting to see if I'd get up like I was just stunned or something. She finally thought that maybe she ought to try to heal me or raise me up again. So
Uh
she
huh.
did that. And gradually, over a very short time, I turned from human to elf.
Okay, GMV now says something that I have to respond to. He says, half races are the result of bards. You can't get rid of half races unless you get rid of bards. Let me put a stop to that one right there. According to this, goes back to back in my day. Back in my day, the bard was one of the two toughest classes to play in Dungeons and Dragons because in order to even attempt bard, you had to be a fifth level fighter, then you had to travel for 5 levels as a rogue, and then you could try. So, yeah, so the lore in his worlds looks like it's a little bit more involved, that there are multiple species of Tower Mox. The, the
The
Chug, the
Herefords, the
Oxenai, and
Angus.
the Bisonai.
Oh, I thought there would be the Charlet and the
That's
Grand
Nycos.
Swift.
That's Nycos. Those are just the names. The SecGen took those species names as their first and last names. So one of the most famous Nycosian entities is
Angus
Angus
or
Hereford, and
Angus,
Angus Hereford is the biggest gun runner on the planet.
his own
Oh,
flying ship.
vaults back into commercials. So it's every half hour. Wow, he got three. That partially may also be because of the popularity of our channel. As we get more viewers, I'm afraid they are going to be adding more commercials because they realize it's a popular channel and they're getting more eyes at a time. I apologize for that part. If when I get to the point when I have enough sponsors, I'll just buy. There's a tier in Twitch you can buy that prevents the viewers from having to see commercials. So when I get to that point, I'll do that, but we're not there yet. So I can only recommend when you can swing it, look for subscriptions. Also, if you are on Twitch, you should, I think, get a gift subscription every so often. And you can actually donate that to someone else and it doesn't cost you any money. So each of you want, if you find that you have one of those, you can either offer it to other players or you can provide it to the channel, and the channel will provide the subs to some. All things to think about. So yeah, the Tarmox in on Nikos were in a unique situation. Uh, Fully half of them were free range, and they lived in a country called Neomoria, or by the city of Moria, and they had their own autonomy and such. And the other half were trapped in a mountain by an evil dwarvish gang that had trapped them. And so the dwarves were basically treating them like servant animals and such like. So there was for a long time animosity and angst between the Grim and the Power Mox. Yes, he's right. He says he knows that the ad volume is a lot higher. They're using the same model that regular television did for a lot of years. They realized that the majority of folks, when a commercial hit, they would leave the room, go make a sandwich or whatever, and so they argued with the FCC and got them to agree to let them increase the volume during the commercial breaks. So I apologize for that bit. I wish there was a way I could handle that. Alas, not at this point. When I have, oh, by the way, if you guys haven't seen it, I thought I put it on this screen, but I guess I didn't. You go fix that. We are on a submission drive, by the way, so I'm trying to get 10 subscribers. That's my original target. So, no, I don't run. He asks, he says, it's not my fault because I don't run Twitch. Do I? No, not yet. Not yet. Maybe someday. When Nycos has become the international roleplay game of the universe, and the others are all paying me a license fee for privilege of using NycosRPG, and more importantly, the quantum die rolling. When they all license quantum die rolling from me, then we can talk about that. Right? So,
Okay.
what was that?
I said I like the system.
Yep. Took some getting used to, though, didn't it? It was
Well,
a little rough at first.
it was at first, but not now. Only getting into the nitty gritties and finding out exactly how I can sculpt my character. So you don't have to worry about class. You don't have a class. You learn the skills that you want to be the things that you would normally call a class. But that way you can have a person who moonlights as a bard but is an infiltrator and spy.
Yep, exactly. So, Gene, I know you got to get up early in the morning for what you got to get to, and it's already midnight. So, I want to thank you for hanging out for the hour.
I
I'm,
will.
I'm
Thank
going to
you.
stay on and chat with you, GMV, if you want, but I have to remind Jean because I don't want her.
Well, no, it's Saturday tonight, not.
Oh, I thought you had you had to get up in the morning. You had said.
No, I got up early this morning for the birthday.
Oh, I got you. Okay,
But
so
that's okay. I'm ready to go to. I am ready. I gotta wait.
it has its comparisons to the GURP system, but when we talk about the quantum die rolling, the QDR, that fixes all conflict from rolling against a skill to full on combat is so much faster.
Yeah,
Gene,
well,
we fought. What was it? You had what 30 models that you guys were tending with on the board last session, and
yep.
we finished the entire combat, including wrap up, before we played even 3 hours because we had to close down at 9. So.
And for example, I played a game tonight that's in the typical role playing system.
Mm-hmm.
We had 8 opponents, and it took us an hour and a half to finish off the 8 opponents.
Yeah, that would have taken us what 10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes. And what's nice about it, there is no such thing as a roll like, oh well, you didn't get the number you needed, you failed. Well, in Nycos, that's not true. There's your number that is your score, and if you roll below it, you have succeeded. If you only roll twice its value, well, you get a partial success. In other words, you haven't totally messed it up. And
Right.
then if you roll half of your normal score, which is called a wild success, and then strange and wonderful things can be dumped on your opponent. Like they
Mm-hmm.
could be unconscious, prone, tangled up, lose their weapon, knocked out,
Shoved off a
and
cliff, pushed in the water.
yeah, off the cliff.
You're a halfling. You can tie their shoes together.
Yeah, well, I remember that's what I did. I ran up and tied up the guy.
Yep.
Anyway, I got to get going because
Yep.
it's been a long, long day for me.
Thanks for stopping by, Gene, and appreciate you being here. And for those of you that are watching and don't understand what's going on, Jean is one of my patrons, and she backs me through the Patreon, and therefore she has access to my channel, which means she also has access to a game that I run that's patrons only on Sunday afternoons. Have a good night, Jean. We'll see you next time.
Hey, guys, fun.
Yep. Alrighty, Game Master Vault. So we are at just over an hour. Is there anything else we want to converse about tonight? Otherwise, I may be getting ready to tie it in. I did make the hour, and that was what I was trying to aim at. But if it's got more, if you have more questions, I'm a big proponent of AMA. So ask me anything. In the meantime, I will mention that the Patreon account, if you are looking at wanting to be a part of that game, is patreon.com/Nycos, NYCOS, like it's spelled up on the sign above my head here. Oh, wrong side. How is it actually on the right side now? No, it is across. Over there. I'm trying to get used to this camera. It's so weird. Sometimes I have it set for mirror, in which case then my left side is my right side and my right side is my left side. Sometimes I leave it like it is now, where it's actually stage left is stage left. So. But anyway, if you are new to the channel, make sure you follow it on Twitch so that you'll be updated every time I do more videos. And I really am glad to have you here. That's fair. Oh no, I get you. I'm not inviting you to come and watch the game on Sunday. I'm saying if you back the patron, you can actually play. I'm with you. I don't sit and watch another group play. That to me that feels like watching paint dry. Although I will go on occasionally and visit other people's channels, and have actually arranged to become a guide or an assistant to them by listening to how their game goes and then giving recommendations on what I would do to improve their gameplay. I have done live stream games. As a matter of fact, if you go to my YouTube channel, which is at NycosRPG, you can actually watch some of the old games from during the pre-COVID days. And nowadays, it seems like so long ago, but that was 2019, 2018. So, and I will be every night doing Game Master Soapbox, and I think this is episode 30. So there's 29 other episodes to go and check out on the channel, and I recommend them all. I will admit that a few of them I was by myself on the stream long enough that I was getting loopy. So there's a couple times in there when I'm making a point that I lose where I was and have to stop and restart. So I guess it's just proving that I'm mortal. And I'm totally with you. It's fun to play role play games, and it's fun to talk about role play games like this show does. But to sit and watch somebody else play, unless there's a way to play, which brings up my next point. If you are interested in getting a free copy of NycosRPG, just show up on this channel, on Twitch, on Saturday. I use a website you may have heard of called startplaying.games, and I schedule there. So if you subscribe to that event, there's no charge for the event. You just simply have to register that you're coming for the, what is it? It'd be the 17th. Then you can play, and if you watch that video, at the end of that video, I'm going to be giving away 3 copies of the NycosRPG rules system. That's a 140-page book as a PDF, and so it's got a lot of the information. Yes, I have a question. Okay. I follow. Okay. This question is going to be a little too unpacked, so I'll start reading what GMV has put for those of you that are hearing this as the podcast. One of the players in GMV's game is a cleric dedicated to Asmodeus. He is a blood descendant, allegedly, to Asmodeus when Asmodeus was an angel. With so much to unpack here. The character is lawful neutral, and he wants to send a devil to try to sway the character to become more evil. Waiting for the question. Okay. Waiting for the rest of it. It says that he as a GM wants to send an additional devil to sidekick this character and try to drive them towards evil. So much to unpack here. It'll be a fun one. I'm glad you asked this point in the stream so I can take time and chew up all of these pieces and make it digestible because it's a lot to. That's very funny. That's a bad pun. Game Master Fall just earned a BP. He says that this character is not evil and he wants to drive him towards evil. And he says, "I want this to be a slow burn." That's a horrible pun. Of course, that's assuming that hell is hot. There's some arguments that it's actually a cold place because it said that it'll be a place with light. But that is a horrible pun. Slow burn in the character's arc. Actually, that's a double entendre as well because an arc is like arc. How would you, as a GM, play this devil to try and turn a character evil? Okay, big pile to work with. Big pile to work with here. Okay, number one, the alignment chart, the lawful evil, good chaos mechanism that's at the heart of the Dungeons and Dragons mechanism is askew. It is errant. If you attempt to follow it, you lead the very characters that should be good towards evil from the get-go anyway. But let's start it there. So, okay, gotta wait for GM. There's another set of ads. We are on the next half hour. That's pretty quick. So, yeah. So I have an issue with the alignment chart first of all, and so on Nikos, the colors you see represented here on the screen, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, are the colors of the religions, and they're not really religions on Nikos so much as they are philosophies. I believe that good or evil in a role-play game only has one purpose, and that is the game master should be driving the players to be good players, good people. There should not be a case where you drive them towards evil, because evil will happen whether you like it or not. So, that, with that said, there's all kinds of other problems. The very concept of having Asmodeus, who is not necessarily not only the Lord of Hell, the king of the devils, but he also is apparently, according to the lore, the creator of the entire hellish landscape. And so, therefore, picking that level to deal with is problematic. Also, you're assuming from the description you gave that Asmodeus was of the framework of the Christian concept, that he fell from grace and was therefore angelic, which is not tied to the Asmodeus lore per se, but it is tied to the Christian concept of the Lucifer lore, if that's the story you want to take. So, Right. So it was him and his brother that created. Right. So the issue that I have is making your character a quote blood relation before does something else really screwy because angels were in effect not sexual beings. Male and female created he them only referred to mortals. It was not a creation process for the angelics. They simply were. And because they were pure servants, they needed neither gender. So, for example, in biblical texts, when they talk about, and this is, of course, a completely separate subject, but in the biblical text, when they speak of angels, they speak of them in the masculine at all times. There's no reference to any female angelics at all. And I think that has everything to do with the fact that they are perceived as being sexless and not identified as either male or female. It's just that an angel is ascribed gender by its part of speech. But I could be wrong there. But going to the specifics, Asmodeus, if Asmodeus was a fallen angel, he couldn't have had children because angels don't have children. If the lore does allow for that to exist, then you have put your character in an OP position. Because if they are of that bloodline, then their very nature should make them impossible to manage as a player character. Not only for you as a game master, but for the player playing them, because the very nature of them puts them outside of the framework. So, having said that, if this is the lore you want to go with, then I come to the second problem with this, and that is why, in the name of role play, would you, as the storyteller, want any character to become evil? Because the purpose of role play games fundamentally is to explore the nature of beings who are not that are not us. We're playing beings that are someone else. And this devil okay. So you're adding in demigods as separate entities, and they're not in this lore structure that created Asmodeus then, because that puts them at odds with the any of the lore because they they wouldn't have existed in the Asmodeus framework because Asmodeus's framework he's created he exists from the beginning of time allegedly, and now you're suggesting that he's angelic. If he's of the angelic bloodline, then that's another problem because he can't have any kids. So player part of the arc that the player wants is to explore his struggle with not wanting to be evil. Okay, he should have to struggle with not being evil, but you don't have to do anything. You don't have to put any impact on them. If you what you're doing is you want to have a way for a character to become evil, just tempt them as you would as we are tempted. But put in front of them the very things that would cause us to fall, and then make that the case for the character. So, okay, there's a box of gold sitting there. Nobody's name is on it, and it's sitting open on the side of the road. You take any gold out of it? Yes, you do. Congratulations, you're evil. You stole. Okay, so don't tempt him. If you neither of you want him to become evil, then play with the concept of the temptation process and then explore it either in the metagame or explore it in game with an NPC foil. It doesn't have to have the aspect of forcing or trying to entice. We already do this. We already suffer from this all the time anyway. So I think you're barking up a slightly different tree. You don't need to find ways to make them go evil other than to offer it, because we as human beings are lured into that all the time. The movie Devil's Advocate shows that pretty well. I don't necessarily like the idea of poor old Keanu Reeves trying to talk with a southern accent. That made me so sad. But to help the characters become heroes. Oh no, you can definitely put the villains out there, but it sounded like you were asking me how to entice them, and it's like you don't want to be the one to entice them, so they are already going to go that direction. So that's fair to say your GM style is that you want to help them become heroes. Well, the first thing about heroes is they have to know thyself. So again, put the challenges in the path of the character, and then make the character analyze them. Let it be a situation where the temptations are at first so overt that they can't hardly miss them, and then go more and more subtle. And that is the way you would test someone's mettle, is have an idea of what you want. But I'm just telling you that the concept of using the alignment chart is your first error there, because that alignment chart, for example, the very concept you said that he's lawful neutral and not lawful evil. How do you differentiate those in play? To me, any character that is trying to be selfish and doesn't break the law is fundamentally lawful evil, because selfishness is itself evil. So, okay, sure, sure, but it doesn't have to be. What I'm getting at is it doesn't have to be a devil. It has to be somebody. A great example of this, again, from a biblical standpoint, is that Peter tells Jesus that he should build a temple, that he should recognize himself, and he should acknowledge his power on earth. And Peter turns to him and says, "Get thee behind me, Satan." He literally calls Peter, the guy who he's going to have the keys of the kingdom in a few days. He tells him, "Get thee behind me," and Satan calls him that. And so you don't have to play out that enticement. You simply entice them and then make them realize it. So I get the idea of what you're going for. As a matter of fact, if you want a really good example of a book that might cover this, and you might want to see it for possible inspiration, is the Screw Tape Letters. Have you heard of that, Jim B? Screw Tape Letters. It's by C.S. Lewis, same author that wrote The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay, you have not heard of it? It's the Screw Tape Letters. SCREWTAPE Letters. You can find it in any library. More than likely, you can find a copy online. But definitely want to go read that. In that story, you have an older devil by the name of hang on a second, Wormwood. No, it is Screwtape. And Screwtape is writing letters to his nephew, who is a devil on earth, and he's a devil that's been assigned to a person that is considering Christianity. And it is a fascinating read, because you're only reading it from the standpoint of old Screwtape as he responds to his nephew. And each letter starts off with, "Oh, nephew, if I had only known what you were going to face, I would have been able to warn you. But this is what's going to go on now." So, yeah, definitely look up Screwtape Letters. That'll give you a lot of good stuff as far as the nuances. Because I think what you're originally asked isn't nearly as bleak as I made it out to be, because I knee jerk in response to the lore of D&D and Pathfinder, because it plays fast and loose with the actual lore of the world. Where back in my day they had a book called Gods, Demigods, and Heroes in the White Book series, and then they reprinted it as Deities and Demigods. And yes, so yeah, if you're reading the summary of the Screwtape Letters, read that and play that as a playbook. Throw the very same temptations at the player that Wormwood was facing, and then you could even have a third party, a priest or something, an advocate someplace, that's feeding back to the temptee or whatever. So That's one way to do it. I do think you want to check that out. I have found one of the most important things about being a game master is to read as many different sources on as many different subjects as you possibly can, because story creation is always easier when you take the framework away and then consider what would happen if that same story was told in a different framework. So take the screw tape letters, dissect it, analyze it, chapterize it in terms of what you can use it for in your game, and then have somebody writing back and feeding back to the player from the opposite side what they're doing. So, have the player do reports or whatever, and then on to the easiest way to do that. So I hope that part helps. I know I came down rather kind of knee jerk response to the lore mechanism, because there's no need to tie to a bloodline to have kind of temptation we all have anyway. And it's really, there's a level of pride that goes into the very creation of a character that makes those kind of audacious claims, because even that claim itself is prideful and therefore already over the slippery line towards evil anyway, because it's raising oneself or elevating oneself against above others, which is ultimately a form of selfishness. So yeah, I will have to say that game masters tend to be, if not the smartest people in the room, are definitely in certain cases the more educated in the room. And I think that has to do also with the amount of processing we have to do. Story. Okay, but what I'm getting at is the player is playing with knowledge that the character wouldn't have. So if the character doesn't know it, then neither should the player. If the player put that in on his side that he wants that, you can tell him that it is, but make sure that it isn't. So okay, they say that the player doesn't even, the character doesn't even know that it's of an angelic bloodline. Yeah, that is kind of strange. There was another commercial break there, so I apologize for that. Yeah, I don't know what the mechanism is. I don't know how the uh, machine works on those levels, because it's not my place to know. But no, so going back to play with only what the player should only have knowledge that the character should know. This is one of the reasons that I had real problems in the early 1980s, is that the monster manual became easily accessible as they moved into later editions, and so more players had older copies of the monster manual, and suddenly every player on the planet knew what the counteractions were to the monsters. So they would know, for example, that they meet a troll in the woods, they immediately hear the word troll, and they know, pull out the fire, because that's the only thing we're going to use to kill it. And that used to frustrate me, because the whole point is that the player, if he's playing as the character and he's new to the world, he shouldn't know that, unless the town had been infected with trolls at some point, in which case that would make sense. But it doesn't in the overall, to assume that a player, his knowledge is allows him to see stuff that the character shouldn't know, because he's going to automatically play with it. So I would just simply shine that part and say, he doesn't know he's Azamar, you won't know he's Azamar. Arguably, if he's Azamar, he is of a different species than mortal, though, so he wouldn't even look like people. So there's that. He's going to have a physical appearance difference. He is a different species. That's the kind of the point of speciation in Dungeons and Dragons, is to draw clear and concise lines between the different species, so that the justification for the rules about them makes sense. If you don't draw those delineations, then they got a problem. That's fair. That's fair. You reskin all the time. Yeah. So a player may be and I get that your players are good at metagaming, but the two big pieces that you're letting them play with that I think are dangerous for you as a game master is the bloodline piece doesn't even really exist. I mean, it can't even exist in the character's mind, let alone in the player's mind. If the player wants to be tempted and challenged, he could play somebody as an absolute innocent and have more trouble, arguably more challenges, and more potential to fall. So, putting him in a position where he's already inclined genetically, what is that saying about the devils? Granted, a devil doesn't have any choice any more than an angel has choice. They must fulfill their role. So, how does he have agency whatsoever? If you say he's a half blood and he's something other than full Azamar, then the bloodline can't exist because they are non related species. So, if it depends on how much quote realism you want to put in your game, how much fantasy. If you're going for a fantastic story and you want him to be tempted, I'm just saying it literally could be the kid next door that tempts him. It doesn't have to be a devil from the abyss, and especially not one that's on the orders of his grandsire, because that would be unrealistically untenable. So that's fair. That's fair. And you can do what you want. I'm answering the question that I feel that you're asking. So if I consider it this way, the Game Master's soapbox is kind of like the Game Master's retail store. You come to the store, you look at the stuff, you ask questions, you find a product, you look at it, you think about it, you ponder it, and then ultimately you can just leave it sitting on the shelf. Because if the advice or the suggestions that I'm making don't fit with what you're doing, do what you're doing anyway. Because I'm not here to take it apart and tell you you can't. I'm just trying to give you the reason that I see that you're giving yourself more of a world of hurt than you need to, and you certainly don't want to go down the road of actually having to think as the evil guy what the evil guy is going to do. Just think in terms of what he would do in real life, and those temptations are going to be sufficient. Because as the saying goes, everyone falls, everyone sins. There's sin around every corner for everybody all the time. You don't have to manufacture particularly non-virtuous villainy, because you don't want to be the one who's planting ideas in the other players' minds either. Well, good point. Most game masters don't have other game masters to bounce ideas off of. That's not true anymore. If you know a game master that isn't bouncing ideas off of a game master, bring them to Game Master's Soapbox. I embrace storytellers. That is my meat and drink. I mentioned that I was professionally in the games business. When I worked for Gamma, I was learning 7 new games a week to try to catch up with all the companies that Gamma represented. And Gamma stands for the Game Manufacturers Association. So I was working with every publisher in the US and Canada and abroad that brought product into the United States. And so therefore I have a lot of game experience from all kinds of brands. And so it doesn't matter whether the person is coming from a Call of Cthulhu background, Shadowrun background, GURPS background. The concepts of role play are still met by this, for example, this checklist works no matter which game system you're coming from, because it's non-game master specific, and the recommendations I'm making are not necessarily system specific. I'm just trying to get you to see why it is that it's a problem that's a non-problem, because you have enough rough stuff in the real world that you don't have to actually reach out and come up with what it would take to convince somebody to do evil. Simply provide them with opportunities and temptations, and they will follow. So, and so, thank you for mentioning that, GMV. I am here for you, and one of the benefits that I offer is that if you subscribe to my channel, And I'm referring to the subscribe for the YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube at NycosRPG, use the search function, go to at NycosRPG, and subscribe to the channel, I provide game master consultation at no charge. I could do it all day long with as many game masters as I can find. So if you have any questions about anything, subscribe on the YouTube channel and you get free access to me for as long as I can handle it. When I get to a certain point, there will be a fee involved, but I will always grandfather the game masters that get in. All right. Excellent, GMV. Glad that you've already subbed. That's awesome. Make sure you comment too on the YouTube channels when you see a video that you chatted me with me on, so that I get the association, because the name Game Master Vault may not translate to YouTube, so I won't know when you're commenting. But I would love to be able to do that correlation. So if you haven't watched the videos that I have over on YouTube, there's a couple I would definitely recommend. First one is quantum die rolling, the QDR one. It's changing. It's going to change the RPG world. It's going to change die rolling overall. There's going to be non-role play games that are going to be based on QDR in the future, whether I have an effect on it or not, because it's a concept, and a concept can't be copyrighted. But you go and look at QDR on that video, like and comment on it, because that video is going to go places, because it changes the way you think about it. So, yeah, you probably subbed the last time you were in here. Since I'm running this only on Twitch, you couldn't have known that you weren't on it on YouTube. So it's still me, so it doesn't matter. But thank you again for your subscription. If you have the possibility of subbing to the Facebook, what is this place? Where are we at? Oh yeah, Twitch. If you subscribe to the Twitch channel, I believe it gets you out of the commercials. That's the only thing I would recommend. And is it worth $4 a month? It might be. I know that it drives me crazy when I watch commercials on YouTube programming and things like that. And it's to the point now I've watched enough YouTube, and YouTube's algorithm knows that I'm going to stick, that it throws the hardline commercials in, the ones that don't have a spinner, don't give you the ability to skip out. So let's see. Did that sort of answer your question? I kind of gave you my opinion and my recommendations. I hope those were helpful. And I appreciate you communicating with me like this. This is the format I much prefer. I could sit and talk all day long if I've got someone I'm speaking with or somebody I'm conversing with. So thank you for that. Yeah, definitely. Okay, just from a pure literary standpoint, it is the Screw Tape Letters is one of the top 20 books, I believe, outside of Scripture. I believe the Bible is the first 66 books that you should read, but the Screw Tape Letters is probably in my top 100 non-scripture books that you should have read or should read. It's a work of art. It really is. So I hope that does help you pursue that angle. And I do want to hear about this Screw Tape campaign, because I think if you track it that way or think of it that way, you'll have even more insight for characters in the future, because it won't only apply to that particular character, but to gameplay in general. Alrighty, I am going to go ahead and call it for the night. I will be back on tomorrow night at 11 p.m. Tomorrow is also Sunday, so if you are one of our patrons on Patreon, you can become a part of the Sunday afternoon RPG session. And if not, remember that next Saturday we're going to be doing a How to Play NycosRPG session Saturday morning. And if you go to startplaying.games, you can register for that event in advance. and guarantee your spot. There's only going to be 8 people that will be invited to that. So I hope to see you all next episode. Thank you very much. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this has been Game Master Soapbox. Have a great night, folks.